We have two great speakers, and the topic for today is to really talk about the latest trends in wide format printing. So with us today is Marco Bohr, who's the Vice President of IT Strategies, expert in the field, and opinions well renowned around the world, right? Marco, we appreciate them. And then also Ken Hanulak, who's Vice President of Marketing, Worldwide Marketing for EFI. And we want to have an overall conversation with the two of them, talking about some trends and sharing some topics. For the participants on the phone, everybody's on mute, but there is a way. There's between the chat and the Q&A session. Feel free to ask any questions as we go. We'll try to either answer them as we go, or we'll save some time at the end to actually walk through some of the questions for that. So with that, Ken, I'm going to make you presenter.
Great.
And let me change you to that. And say it's pretty straightforward, and then I didn't do it. So you should have the ball to be presenter. So we appreciate the topic, and I'll let you take it from there.
Either there's a delay or I don't have it, Dan.
No, I needed to hit one more button, so that was my delay.
All right, so let me share my screen. Can you guys see the slides? I just go in pre-zone mode.
Yep. Just go in pre-zone mode. That'd be great. Yep.
Okay. Look good?
Yep.
Great. Awesome. Thanks for the intro, Dan. Marco, again, welcome. I think Dan undersold you a bit. You know, Marco's an expert in the analog to digital fields across the print supply chain, over 30 years in the business. Principal and Vice President at IT Strategies, and a great friend of ours. So Marco, thanks so much for joining.
All
right, so let's jump into top wide format graphic trends for 2022 and I guess a little bit beyond. So Marco, it appears we're finally, thank God, on the other side of this global pandemic, or certainly nearing the end. But like everything in life, there's so much change and you know, challenges and headwinds that are emerging, and the changes seems to come at a rapid pace. Can you give us a bit of a sense of what we should be on the lookout for in the second half of 2022 and beyond?
Sure. So first of all, you know, I've been, as you said, in this business for 30 years, and I've never seen it so complicated. It is absolute chaos, and everywhere you turn, there's a new challenge coming up somewhere. But it's not necessarily bad news, right? As my favorite, you know, politician once said, "Never waste a good crisis." And I wouldn't say we're in a crisis, but we're certainly in a stage where something like 50 to 70% of a print provider's mental energy every day is going towards really two things. One is finding substrates, and number two, finding employees. And so these are really immovable things, right? We know it's a problem. I think, can tell you that neither one of these problems is going to go away anytime soon, and for reasons which we'll get into in a second. But at the end of it all, it also puts things into much sharper focus for the people who buy print. Because what happens is, at the end of the day, because substrates have gotten so expensive, and because there's limited capability, right, to get your print, you're only going to print what you absolutely need, and you're going to want to pay for it. And so all of those inherent benefits that are in digital printing, right? The ability to do things very quickly, short runs, and just the amount that you need. You can version it. You can customize the size of it. You can even add variable date in some instances. All of these things are resonating better than ever. So a couple of things on the substrate side. We are, of course, greatly dependent upon imports for things like vinyl, even for paper. And what's happened is that on the paper side of things, the domestic paper mills have cut back dramatically on the capacity that they have available for what we call printing and writing papers. Many of these mills are shifting over to packaging grades, and as a result, there's basically a shortage. Now that's not new. That's been going on for a while, but we've been able to bridge that shortage with paper imported from Asia. And of course, during the supply chain problems related to COVID, there's just not enough containers coming in. Now, the good news is that is starting to change a little bit. I read this morning that there's only 22 ships outside of Long Beach and Los Angeles awaiting unloading, as opposed to about, I think, a peak of 169, not even 12 months ago. But the bad news is that all of that paper and vinyl that's coming in from the Far East is still going to be really expensive. And it's expensive mainly because the container shipping cost is still about 4x of what it was pre-COVID. Now it is coming down a little bit, and it's coming down in part because of the lockdown that happened in China. And so a lot of the other consumer goods that would have been shipped here didn't get shipped because they weren't made. But the reality is substrate pricing is going to remain very, very high, even though we hope it's going to become a little bit more available. The other problem is this labor issue. Now this is not a short-term issue. Yes, of course, COVID changed a lot of this. Many of the workforce in our industry, particularly in the side of finishing and the likes, received, government assistance. They found that other retail jobs are paying more money in some instances and have more predictable and palatable work hours, right? So if you have a choice to work the midnight shift at $12 an hour in the bindery or finishing department, or you have the opportunity to work at Target for $20, $24 an hour, what would you choose, right? And so these are infrastructure problems that are not going to go away, and they're not going to go away for one simple reason, and that's demographics. As you look at the birth rate in the US, since the Great Recession in 2008 to about 2018, we had about 500,000 fewer babies born in the US. And those first babies will start entering the workforce in 2026. So we're looking at about 15% fewer workers entering the workforce in 2026. That is a huge problem because it's not just our industry, right? It's the overall economy. So the point of all of this is not that it's bad news, it's just a fact. And so as you look at this, what happens is that ultimately print is going to become more expensive. However, the price elasticity is such that all of the brands of people who buy print are willing to pay because the inherent benefits that print offers are really, really strong. In the retail world, we call it the moment of truth, right? When you see that point of purchase sign, but that goes across many, many other applications in our industry. So, my core takeaway is, look, yes, substrates is a problem, labor is a problem, but in the end, the value that we're creating, particularly on digitally printed signage and wide format output, that's going to get stronger and stronger. So not bad news. We just need to come to terms with how we market it and how we communicate all of these challenges to our end customers.
That's a great macro perspective, Marco. Really appreciate those insights. Now, if we were to click just a layer deeper, how do you translate that and what it really means for the print service providers? I know you talk to folks all over the globe, and I know you've got a big perspective on this.
Well, again, sorry for the wordiness, right? But if you look at the macro trends here, there are a couple of things going on. During COVID, of course, wide format signage got hit pretty hard, specifically relating to what we call mass events, sporting events, concerts, amusement parks, entities that consume huge amounts of volume of wide format signage. There was some good news, of course, for short-term COVID-related signage, making customers aware what the rules are when entering a store and all that. But that's a short-term issue. What we really have to look forward to now is that in our US economy, we're at a stage where, yes, COVID's been horrible for a lot of people, but very quietly, it's also been very good for a lot of other people. And so at a macroeconomic level, we're still sitting on something like 26% more savings in consumer savings accounts than we did before COVID. And what's happening is now that we've got a little bit of freedom to travel and to go out, all of those consumers are saying, the ones who have that cash, let's go and have some experiences, right? Because life is short. I felt so bad being locked up for so long. I'm going to take that trip. I'm going to take a cruise. I'm going to go to Disney World. I'm going to go to that rock concert. And so all of these entities, right, that provide these services and experiences need to have a fresh new look to really entice people to come back and to make sure that it doesn't feel tired and worn out. And so you've got things like amusement parks that are completely refreshing all of their costumes. You've got sporting events, right, that are trying to fill those ad spaces with really impactful signage. Rock concerts. I mean, it's frankly a really exciting time. So it is coming back, and I'm very glad to see it's particularly coming back for these larger volume events. So long term, that's good news. The bad news, of course, is you need to make sure that you as a print provider communicate back to your customers to say, hey, if you're going to have this big promotion, this big campaign, right, you're going to tell me in advance as to when you're going to need that signage, because I don't want to disappoint you when it comes to not having enough substrate available. And so all of that communication that we've taken for granted for so long needs to get tighter. And I can tell you that many of the print providers are in turn telling their customers, you need to plan out not 2 weeks or 4 weeks. I really need you to tell me what's going to happen in 6 to 12 months, because that way in turn I can communicate back to my print substrate provider what I'm going to need to make sure that you've got all of the volume that you want. So it's a great opportunity really to number one, call upon your, in some cases, customers that you hadn't spoken to in a long time, to have these conversations, to set the expectations, but to also make them aware of all of the capabilities that they may or may have forgotten about. And meanwhile, many of the print providers, of course, have reinvested in new equipment because they want to get more efficient. And that new equipment is enabling new applications. So all of these things are, in my opinion, a really great opportunity to highlight what it is that we do, right, in the point of purchase signage and the wide format signage for all of our customers.
Yeah, that's great. That's great, Marco. And we, I guess, had a fortunate and unfortunate lesson recently. The Bruins making the playoffs and the Celtics making the playoffs. But let's get a bit deeper on the supply chain. I mean, it's you started with the paper shortages, and there's some big challenges ahead of us. What are you hearing? The supply chain challenges.
So a couple of things. So I mentioned that the containers are loosening up a little bit. So short term, I think we're looking pretty good in terms of more availability of substrates. The bad news is that it's still constrained. We're still down about 20% in terms of the availability of substrates that we really want. So what we're seeing is something that probably shouldn't have been called hoarding. But we are finding that many print providers are buying substrates well in advance of when they need them. And they're doing this for a couple of reasons. A, they're locking in volume that has already been committed to. So if a major brand wants to run a certain campaign and they've already been informing their print provider, you're going to go ahead and buy that substrate now. One of the reasons you're willing to take a risk in buying that substrate is A, you've got a commitment from your customer, but more importantly, we're also in a stage of fairly significant inflation. And so if I buy that substrate today and pay for it, even though I don't need it for another 6 months, the odds are pretty good that what I've bought today is going to be a lot less expensive than what it will be in 6 months. And in fact, we're told that we're probably looking at least 2 more price increases on substrates before the end of the year on the paper side of things. And that gets to that last bullet here, and that's about paper mills. So in the US market, there's a couple of really large paper mills, including Verso and Domtar, and collectively, they have probably about 50% of the paper supply in the US. And if you look closely at what they are saying publicly, it's not necessarily great news, right? Because both of these entities are saying we're going to continue to shut down mills that make printing and writing papers. And we're going to keep on converting them to packaging papers and the likes. That does a couple of things. It's indicative of the fact that substrates are not going to get any less expensive. And when that happens, I think it's going to step up the pressure even more than what we've seen today. on really short runs. You know, before COVID, it was not uncommon to see 30% of point of purchase signage never be used, right? People bought it, they overbought it because, you know, we're looking for the lowest cost per thousand. And in the end, a lot of that, whether it's 30 or 20%, just disappeared. Uh, and so that waste is really not acceptable anymore because substrates are going to be so expensive that you can't tolerate it. It's not part of the cost of doing business anymore. So again, ultimately, as we look forward as an industry, right, looking forward, we need to prepare our customers that it is going to get more expensive, but that it's also going to be a lot more valuable. And so again, you as a print provider have to leverage the benefit of digital production printing, right, in our space to be able to make these quick turnarounds. So it's not just digital printing equipment, it's also the software, right, that enables these customers to order things very quickly, and for you to allow customers insight in terms of where these jobs are. I
think
think we may have lost Ken, did we?
we did lose Ken. He's joining back in. So I picked up the slides and we'll go from there. And I think there was one more that we wanted to go through this.
Sure. Yeah. The last comment on the substrate side is one that's a little bit sobering in a way. We've been talking to a lot of the paper mills out there, and again, this is not including the vinyl side of things, but these paper mills are very much in a situation where it's the old 80-20 rule, right? 80% of their customers, or rather 20% of their customers, account for 80% of their revenue and profit, and the 80% that account for only 20% of their profit are frankly a bit of a problem, right? So if you're a really small print provider, and you're calling up the paper or substrate supplier, saying, oh, I need this, and you don't really provide a lot of revenue to these guys, frankly, you're difficult from their perspective to deal with. And so what we're starting to see now is that many of the paper merchants are looking at making some really difficult decisions where they're saying, look, if I've got 100 customers and 80 are frankly not very profitable for me, I'm going to start weeding out the bottom 10% of those 80 because they're just taking up too much of my time, right? And I just don't have the bandwidth because I've got less employees. So I'm going to get rid of the bottom 10%, and I'm going to give that little bit of extra substrate that's now available to my best customers. When they do that, they are keenly aware, because we are humans after all, that if I cut you off as a small print provider and a small customer, you are probably unlikely to be able to find substrate somewhere else because nobody is taking on new customers. So it becomes very Machiavellian. At the end, what you can do to protect yourself against that is, number one, make sure that you pay promptly, which I think most people do anyway. But you just don't want to give a paper supplier or substrate provider the excuse, right, not to service you. And the other thing that you need to do is you probably need to come up with some kind of a larger purchasing network, right, to make sure that you are part of a bigger, entity buying substrates so that you don't get left out. So there are things that you can do to mitigate this, but I just want you to keep a heads up because unfortunately, those that are, in a position of having a weaker balance sheet or just don't have the scale are probably more at risk, right, in terms of finding substrates. So just make sure you keep a close eye on that.
Yeah, those are great points with, some actionable items, right? Make yourself bigger, right at the end of the day is what you're saying. How do you make your purchasing bigger?
Right.
What about some other big issues, maybe around labor or unemployment levels or wages, things along those lines?
Well, that's another huge Pandora's box, right? If you flip to the next slide, there's a little schematic that's probably oversimplified, but basically what it says is during this whole COVID crisis, we ended up with what we're calling the Great Resignation. So many of these necessary workers that we need to run our print shops basically said, I'm leaving, right? I'm going to Amazon at $30 an hour. It depends on the region that you're in. But certainly we've all seen that wage inflation. And part of the problem is we try to backfill that with temporary labor, which is still available, but those temp labor guys are making at least $17 an hour, sometimes more. And your loyal workers, right, who are still maybe at $14, $15 an hour see this, right? Because we live in a small world, and they say, hey, wait a minute, boss. If you're paying these temp guys that are unskilled 17, you got to pay me, 20, 22 or more, right? And so at the end of it all, these things sort of flare up when you least expect it. And what we're finding is that in order to make sure we don't lose employees, particularly valuable ones, we're paying them more, right? And we're voluntarily giving them more raises. In the end, we should probably be budgeting that our average wage, again, depending on the region that you're in, but East Coast and West Coast for sure, is probably going to be in that $20 to $22 an hour range. And again, based upon my demographic comment, we didn't make enough new babies during COVID. And so none of these labor issues are going to get resolved anytime soon. And on top of it, I didn't even mention, but of course, the Gen X people, which includes you and me, Dan, at some point in the next 5 to 10 years, right? God willing, we'll be looking for new chapters of adventure. So anyway, you got to really prepare for that. And that's the key thing.
Well, it sounds like that's what, I mean, this is the way it is, right? So again, back to this is the facts you're going through.
Yeah, if you flip to the next slide, Dan, this is the comment on the birth rate. It's a little bit hard to see, but this comes from the U.S. Census, and what it shows you is the birth rate from 1900 to 2018. And the key thing, if you click two more, is what you'll find is from 2008, which is that last spike, to 2018, we had literally 500,000 fewer babies being born in the U.S. And we just can't make that up, right? And to me, somewhat surprisingly, we didn't make it up during COVID either, right? You think everybody was at home and you'd see more babies being born, but apparently it hasn't happened. So as a result, there's really not a lot we can do about this, right? Yeah, you might have more immigration at some point, and that helps Europe, sadly, in many ways, right? As the Ukraine sees a lot of immigration, but it doesn't help us in the U.S. So there's really, not a lot we can do except for a couple of things. One is automation. And so the more we can do to remove the human touch points, the better off we'll be. And so that means we really need to move more to a digital workflow. And that digital workflow isn't just more Vutec presses or Nozomis or Reggianis or what have you. It also means you have to have a lot more software. And we got to put more things into the cloud. One of the things that constantly surprises me, and I think it catches a lot of people off guard, is that, you think what's happening in your business and you think what your costs are, right? Because you've been running it for 30 years. But as we go through this inflationary spiral of costs, when you sit down and you really see what it costs to set up a screen press and what it costs to, buy more screens and to clean the screens and all of the labor that goes into that, I think you're going to be very surprised that delta that we used to have between what it costs to run a screen press versus a digital press, that delta is shrinking very, very quickly. And of course, it was always contingent upon the run length of things and the versioning. But I think it's going to be eye-opening for a lot of people when they really sit down and run those numbers in strictly black and white Excel metrics.
Really take a look at them now compared to what they think they are. Like really dig in and say, this is the actual numbers. How does that really look? Yes. With that open eyes, right? So.
And when you do that, you're going to be surprised. I guarantee you, it's not what you think.
I can imagine. Well, maybe it's good. This and the next question we want to talk about is we went through a big wave of consolidation in the first part of COVID, right? Mm-hmm. Some experts are talking about a new wave that might involve even private equity and the like. What can you talk about?
Dan, just as if it wasn't enough, right, for us to face these substrate supply chain challenges and the labor challenges, let's just throw a third thing into this perfect storm, right? And that third variable is private equity. So if you flip to the next slide, a couple of things that happen here. one of the things is that private equity, which is basically a bunch of very rich individuals pooling their money to find something that makes a better return than the stock market, they have fallen in love with the print industry. And they've fallen in love with the print industry because it is an industry that has very good cash flow, right? If you don't pay for your print job, you're never going to get another print job again. So people do tend to pay in the print industry. The other big thing is we are highly, highly fragmented because historically, print was really an artisanal craft, right? We competed upon regionality and our wonderful service and our wonderful print quality. And you know, because print was frankly difficult to buy, you needed somebody to hold your hand, right? To walk you through the process of what was possible and not possible. Here comes along private equity, and they're doing a couple of things. So first of all, they're saying, wow, look at all that cash, right? That's great. And secondly, look at all these incredible inefficiencies by having this incredibly decentralized market. So they come along and they say, I'm going to buy what they call a platform company. So they're going to buy a wide format print provider that's somewhere between 10 to 50 million in revenue. And they tend to be fairly well run, right? They're profitable. And they've got a process. Then what they do is they say, I'm going to buy 5 to 10 more smaller wide format print providers, and I'm going to tuck them under this platform company. And that will enable me to basically get rid of 5 to 10 accounting departments, 5 to 10 procurement departments, 5 to 10 IT departments, and I'm going to subsume all of that under my platform company. Now, oh, by the way, I'm not necessarily closing the location, right, of the smaller guy that I've acquired, because I still need to be able to deliver that output quickly to the end customer. And shipping cost matters a lot, particularly for heavyweight substrates like vinyl and the like. So I do want that regional footprint. I just don't want that regional back office infrastructure footprint. And so they are coming along and they then look at this and say, well, what's my biggest challenge in making even more profit now that I've made that really efficient? Well, number one challenge they have, labor, right? Or it's really the number 2 challenge after substrates, but it's one of the top 2 challenges. So how do I make sure that I don't need as much labor? Well, the easy answer to that is I'm going to buy more equipment that's highly automated. And oh, by the way, they can do that because they're private equity and they're sitting on a lot of cash. So they're coming in and they're coming to companies like ViewTech, right? And they're saying, you know what? That next generation platform, right, that you've been developing, I'll buy 2 of these. And oh, by the way, I'm going to then sort of consolidate 3, maybe 4 older machines that I have and consolidate all of that volume of that one more modern machine that's far more productive. And then along the way, what happens is it's not just a new machine that they're buying, right? They're also buying more software and they're expanding because the little regional guy that they bought may have a specialty application that their core platform company wasn't really participating in a whole lot. And so maybe something as simple as, you know, they had a great focus on backlit signage for airports. And that's done on soft signage material these days. So they invest and expand into those applications. The upshot is that the world, in some ways, sadly, but the world of our print provider business is dividing into the haves and the have-nots. So if you have capital, you're able to reinvest and you're going to grow and you're going to expand and you're going to become more efficient. And the have-nots, right, that have a smaller balance sheet, really have only 2 choices. The first choice is I'm going to sell myself to a private equity guy because you know what, my business is worth more now than it probably has been in a long time, and I'm going to exit. And that's one option. The other option is I'm actually going to invest in some of that same equipment, maybe at a slightly smaller scale, but I'm going to focus more on verticals and real specialties. And I'm going to make myself as attractive as I can be because you know what? I'm either going to grow myself in that application and reach a stage where I'm going to start acquiring companies, or I'm going to make myself so attractive that I'm going to double the value of my company and I'll end up selling to a PE firm in 3 to 5 years. And so there are opportunities. The good news, and this is sort of course, a little bit selfish on my part because we help to develop next generation printing equipment, is the good news is that all of these benefits that digital printing equipment has enabled for so many years are now being amplified, right? Because these short runs are going to get shorter. The demand for you to turn those jobs around is only going to get tighter, right? Your customers are becoming so, I guess, customized to having deep insight on where their job is. You know, when you order something from Amazon, you can see exactly when it's going to be delivered. They send you a little picture of when it was delivered. That same kind of expectation is going to penetrate our print provider industry. And customers are going to want transparency. I've sent you my job. Where is it? Right? Is it in finishing yet? When is it on the truck? I want to know. And so all of that, I think, bodes really well for those of us who continue to invest. Now, there is a problem, of course, with that. And that is, it's great and all to say, oh, we got to automate. It's wonderful, right?
Yeah.
It's going to cost money. It is not free automation. And that's really the big issue I think we're seeing in our business, is that the business model of being in our industry is changing. And it's changing into a far more professional business. It's no longer, the family-owned business. It's a professional business that every year has to invest more and more money in automation, and maybe even take on debt, right, to finance that automation. Now debt is not a bad thing necessarily, because it does enable you to grow, but it's got to be deployed correctly. And so that's very uncomfortable, I think, for a lot of family-owned businesses where, I used to buy a ViewTech and I'd run that for 5 years. It'd be fully amortized, and it's going to run another 5 to 10 years and it'll be fine, right? Those business models are probably going to disappear. So it's all fueled by this private equity.
No, it makes sense for sure. And Ken, I think we have you back now as well. You may be on mute still. I think you're on mute. I can take you off mute.
Apologies, having some time.
Those internet connections up in the mountains must not be very good these days.
I got fiber optic here, but it's not cooperating. Dan, I'll let you run with it, okay? It's going in.
Yeah, no problems. I mean, we've had a great conversation, and I, appreciate Marco's insights, obviously, from that. That's one of the things, and we talked about some of the things that are going to be around for a long time: the substrates, the labor issues, what's next with private equity. One of the other topics that continues to come up is this idea of convergence. I know we've had a lot of conversations about that internally, convergence, and I think Ken at FESPA, you saw a lot of that, and you guys saw a lot of that at FESPA in Berlin, in Germany. And I'm sure we'll see more at Printing United this fall. But what are some of the applications that are probably ripe for expansion? If we talk about that convergence, where areas are ripe, especially for wide format printers? So
I think, Dan, people talk about convergence. I prefer the latter word you used, and that is application expansion. So these, newer generation of wide format products are extremely versatile. And they're getting more and more capable, right? Every new introduction that's out there gets better and better. And so one of the things we're finding is that as this new technology emerges, and a great example, right, at the leading edge is Nozomi. There's never been a device that's been that productive with that many print heads, that's so capable. But of course, that's not free, and it is a very expensive device. Now it's profitable, but I think for a lot of print providers, that's really a little bit of an aspiration, right? So what we're finding is that as more and more of these corrugated converters and corrugated display manufacturers find out about the capability of what inkjet can do for their business, smaller print providers are also saying, wow, that's really interesting. And even, dedicated corrugated converters are saying, I've got all of these challenges right now managing substrates and labors. I'm really not ready to take that leap of faith into a Nozomi, but you know what? I'm going to buy a ViewTech because that new XT or some of the other models that are out there are actually really good. Yeah, it's not single pass, but it's got the same capability, right, in terms of being able to print on these very thick substrates with beautiful quality, with white inks. Um, you know, I'm going to use that to get into these new applications. And often what happens is it's sort of like a serendipitous, event where a customer comes to him and says, "Hey, I didn't know you could do that." And all of a sudden, somebody says, "Oh, I've got a friend who's getting into the subscription box business." During COVID, he started this new company that's selling, widgets. Can you make him a few boxes? And that's how things just start proliferating. And that's really a key benefit, right, of all of our digital technology, because what you find is it isn't just corrugated, right? You're also getting into decor and other things over time. And so the more open-minded you are, and the more R&D you do, and by the way, I always make fun of this, right? Because in our OEM equipment world, we think R&D stands for research and development, but the real description of it is rip off and duplicate. So the more you look at what your competitors are doing, your peers in the industry, the better off you're going to be. And that's why webinars like this are so important. And of course, things like EFI Connect and Printing United, because these are events where you can really find out what others are doing and try to figure out if that makes sense for you or not.
Yeah, that makes sense. I can understand that for sure.
Dan, one of the things that you'll find is as you get into these things, sometimes you are caught by surprise as to how fast these applications grow.
Yeah.
If you flip to the next slide, this is our forecast on what's been happening in the market where Nozomi participates. So these are what we call the single pass inkjets. Our projection is, if you flip one more, that this market is growing something like 58% a year in output volume. But what we're finding, and I think Ken would probably correct me on this, is that Nozomi is actually growing at a far higher rate in volume of output than what we're forecasting here for this market. And that's the big surprise, right? So you buy a new piece of equipment, you think you're going to transfer a set of pre-existing volume from screen or flexo onto your digital machine, and that's how you justify, right, the pro forma in that investment decision. But what you end up finding is that it always takes a little longer initially for most, not all, to get that volume to ramp up. But then what you find is that unexpectedly, once people inside your shop figure out how to sell that to your customers, and once you figure out that it isn't just your existing customers that can benefit from that, and you start taking on net new customers, that's when that growth rate explodes. And these high double-digit growth rate numbers are very realistic, and it always catches us by surprise. So that's another key observation for me, is that as you invest in new technology, don't just make the investment decision on the basis of shifting existing business from one piece of equipment to another. Use that new capability to find net new customers, because that's ultimately how you're really, really going to grow your profits. So,
and Mark, you said a couple really key things there. Dan mentioned convergence, and we saw the display guys getting into corrugated. Half of our Nozomi install base are implementing and executing around display graphics based applications, and we started 100% focused on corrugated, and they took us there. And it's the concept you shared earlier, where give someone the ability to print what they want, when they want, where they want, and how many. It's going to take off every time.
Yep, it's not quite the field of dreams, right? Build it and they'll come. If it was, your life would be a lot easier, Ken.
Yeah.
But the reality is that it does open up some really good net new opportunities, and that's what we get excited about.
Yeah, and with over 50%, CAGR. So is single pass the final end to analog printing? Is that next, or what other applications are ripe for this kind of opportunity?
Oh, Dan, I wish we had cocktails.
I know.
The truth serum would really come out, right? So,
Yeah.
so we as an industry, as a digital print industry, blissfully talk all day long about, the displacement of analog technologies, right? Screen, flexo, offset, gravure. The reality is, while we've made far more progress in that on the wide format graphics side of the house than in document printing and the likes, I personally believe all of these things will coexist for a long time because there are always going to be certain run lengths that are just so long that inherently it makes more sense to put that on conventional technology. But here's what you really need to look at as a print provider. It's not about the economies of scale, right, on output volume. We were so driven for years on just volume, right? That's how we made money. What we really need to be focused on is value of output. And a digitally printed sign tends to be anywhere between 2 to 10 times more valuable in terms of what our customers or end customers are willing to pay for than a conventionally printed sign, right? Because that digitally printed sign is available now. It's available in super small quantities. You can change it at the last minute without having a surcharge in some cases. I mean, all of these things make digital printing so flexible. And that's why statistically, it's always been more valuable. And that's really one of the things to watch for is what can I do as a business owner, right? To drive up my revenue, my profit. And I don't think it's really about volume anymore these days. It's really a lot more about value. So
I think that's one of some of the other applications are ripe for this opportunity. One of the things, there's some I think we have on the next slide
yeah,
to talk through. Let me go to that.
sure. So we've talked a lot about, of course, wide format point of purchase signage and corrugated signage and the likes. The other big thing we're finding is that particularly now, right, as many businesses are, struggling, I suppose, to some degree to get people to want to come back to the office. An easy way to do that is through making it more enticing to come back. And so the first thing you want to do is you're going to want to get rid of all the dead plants that are floating around in these offices. The second thing you're going to want to do is spruce it up a little bit. Now you can spruce it up through, reconfiguring space, but a really inexpensive way to make a space pop is to use a digitally printed mural. It is to take some textile inkjet printed material to change out just a bunch of the cubicle panels, right? And so for very little money, you can create a etched window look. You can create that new soft sign that's going to advertise and welcome the company weekly luncheon, right, to get you to come back. There's just so many things to do to make things pop really inexpensively rather than having to repaint the entire office or move walls or God knows what, that we're finding that many of the print providers we talk to are saying, I had this capability and what's really making a difference in my financial life is I'm not just printing it. I'm going out and I'm installing it. Now, I wish I had more installers and me as the shop owner, I'm going out on a Saturday and installing this. But you know what? I'm making money. And it's not necessarily what I want to do on a daily basis, but it's setting the stage, right, for me to get far more proficient at it and ultimately to do hire people who can do that for me. So it's, it's another little subset, but it's a good subset.
Hey, Marco, you mentioned being in the airport, I guess earlier today, and you certainly saw, a tremendous amount of signage. I would bet that cocktail you're talking about after 5 o'clock, please, that you saw a lot of soft signage in the airport. And, one of the things that I can share, we've got this wonderful view into the world based on the ink we sell into the marketplace. And dye sublimation was one of the last categories to really come back post-pandemic. And we have seen that it's not quite back to pre-pandemic levels, but it's really, really close. What are you seeing in the dye sub world?
Dye sublimation is such a unique technology, and people love it in part because, of course, for soft signage, you're able to get a lot more revenue for a soft sign typically than you can for a vinyl sign or a paper sign. It adds a look and feel that's really luxurious, right? And historically people liked it because if you hang it from the ceiling, the natural airflow makes that sign flutter and it draws your eyes to it, right? So all of that is great. But what we found is, as you mentioned during COVID, right, things got pretty dire for dye sublimation because we didn't have trade shows, which is where a lot of that material was used. That is coming back, but it's also coming back in other ways, right? I know that some of your customers do a lot of work with these amusement parks, and they're creating, new costumes using dye sublimation technology. So it isn't just for signage, right? It's also for costumes, for jerseys, and God knows what. But we're also seeing, really nichey things. So during COVID, I think a lot of people sat around their homes and said, what can I do to sort of spruce it up, right? And that's driving the revenue of HGTV and all of these, home entertainment shows, right? And what you find is that people are saying, wow, what can I do with my garage, right? It was pretty, not so great space, right? What if I paint it, I finish my floor, but now I still have all of me, these tools and the racks in my garage. What if I can hide that? So people are printing basically curtains, like an oversized shower curtain, to hide all of this and make it into an adjacent entertainment space, right? I open the door, I get airflow, and it's like an indoor outdoor living space. Dye sublimation works really, really well for that kind of application because it's light, right? It's luxurious looking, and people pay a huge premium to get that. So I think dye sublimation is going to come back. Yes, we'd love to see some more mass events, right? And have that accelerate. But for the moment, the focus is really on a lot of these specialties that are, again, super valuable. So that's where I would focus if I were a print provider.
Interesting. So it's different applications as you come in, Ken.
Yeah, I think that's a great perspective, Marco, and like all those different application examples. So now that we painted a picture of the great opportunity that's out there, how do you go to market and how do you sell this, and what are some of the technologies that enable sort of print service providers to get in front of more customers?
Well, so, at the end of the day, we're moving from this artisanal world to a more professional world. And one of the things that at least I find is it's still kind of difficult to buy print, right? Because I need to talk to somebody. But as the internet technology matures and the likes, and e-commerce becomes more and more prevalent for everybody, right? Because COVID forced us all to do more e-commerce. I think you're going to find that virtually every single print provider out there is going to have some portal. And it isn't just for walk-ups, right? Or small consumers. There are portals where larger brands are going to want a dedicated website. It's sort of a pass-through website that makes it look like it's theirs, but that enables all of their employees, franchisees, etc., to order signs very easily. I'll give you a great example. I'm in Boston, and there's a lot of colleges. There's a little private college in Cambridge, pretty well known, that has that works with a print provider that has a portal. Now as a professor at this little Cambridge University, sorry, I slipped up there. They allow their professors to order signs and business cards and the likes, and it makes it really, really simple. Because number one, it conforms to all of their looks and feels that this university has. It allows you some variation to put content into that sign, but the ability to do that online just has removed all of the stumbling blocks, right? I don't need to go to my procurement department to get a PO to order a $50 sign. It's been made so easy for me. And that's really another big piece, I think, that most print providers need to, whether they like it or not, they need to start investing in that. Because the easier you make it for anybody, whether it's a consumer or a nonprofit entity or a university or a for-profit business to order from you, the better off and the bigger a potential customer base you're going to get. So.
Great. Hey, Marco, I'm told we have just about 7 more minutes, so let's put a bow on it, Dan. If you go to the next slide.
Yep.
Yeah. So my view of the world is that COVID again was really an awful thing for a lot of people, and it was an abrupt reset. But it was also an opportunity, right? It was an opportunity to throw away these old sort of mantras and unmovable tenets, right? This is only what I do. I don't do anything else. I can't do it that way. All of a sudden, it gives you that opportunity to get into new businesses, to have new business models. And as you implement those things and the economy reopens, all of a sudden, I think your opportunities as a print provider are going to continue to expand. And as that happens, I would strongly encourage you to invest, right? And maybe even take on some debt in investing in new equipment, new software, et cetera, to expand into net new businesses, net new applications like decor, soft signage, fabrication, you name it. At the end of it all, you can be assured that A, the business is going to grow, B, you're going to have more competition, particularly from private equity led entities. And number three, others, and that's where that conversions really does come in. Others like commercial printers, right, which have dabbled with wide format signage but never have gotten really seriously into it. They're getting more seriously into it. And so to protect yourself, to put you 2 steps ahead, right, of all of that other competition that's coming in, keep on expanding into net new applications, keep on investing, because that's the only way you're going to stay ahead of that curve. And oh, by the way, subliminally, you make your business more valuable, because should you decide in a couple of years that, you know what, my business is now so valuable, I'm better off, selling it and getting out, you've got options. And that, at the end of the day, is what we all look for, right? I want a plan B and a plan C while I grow my business. So it's a great time, I think, to really be in this business. Again, all of those inherent benefits that digital printing offers are amplified, right? And enable you to do these really, short runs, high value turnarounds and the like. So it's a great time to be in this business.
That's great. Dan, I think we've got time for a few questions. Do you have any?
So let me see. One question was interesting about the labor, because even outside the U.S., there's some labor markets that are required to adjust by inflation. So, on top of what you've already talked about, there may be, depending on the market, there may be specific market conditions as well that go beyond that. Have you seen that as well?
Well, I think I would say that's probably code for a question of having to deal with like unionized labor and the likes. And so there are, of course, cost of labor increases, and we're seeing a little bit of increase in basically organized labor, right, demanding higher wages, and so that's just a fact of life. I'm more worried long term about these long term demographic trends, because it's baked in. That's not going to change. So our labor costs are going to continue to increase whether we like it or not.
Mm-hmm. Other questions? If you have a question, please type it in the chat window or the Q&A window. We do appreciate it. I think there's a lot we've talked about today. So when it comes to things like soft signage, what's a way to get started? I don't know how to, as a simple question, if it's a new business or a new application, what's your recommendation? You talked about investing into the future, not just shifting your existing business. How do you kind of frame that up to say, what does a future business look like?
Well, Ken might not like my answer on this one, but what I would do if I were a print provider is I would first look at what people are really buying in the area of soft signage, and are there certain verticals in my market where soft signage works really well? And it could be something as silly as tablecloths. It's like we're heading back into tailgating season. Wouldn't it be great to get all these customized tablecloths, right? Once you've identified an application, what I would probably do initially is try to wholesale those jobs out to somebody who's got a practice in soft signage. And while you are then building the volume as a pass-through entity, really, when you reach a stage where you can comfortably make the investment to then jump into soft signage, that's when I jump in. Some people are more adventurous, and maybe for those adventurous types, they can jump in and buy a wonderful fab review 340 right out of the gate.
Yeah.
I'm a little bit more conservative. I'd want to make sure that I had enough volume to really fill it,
Build the
because
business.
it's not good for them or, frankly, for EFI if you don't fill it. So
I actually appreciate your response, Marco. It's fair and balanced as always, and we do have both. We've got the serial entrepreneurs, and then we have the people that take a more a logical path, I'll say. So it makes sense.
Yeah. There's another question about like ink. So ink waste, ink yield, gaining more per liter on ink. What can EFI do? What can a print provider do along those lines? How do you tackle ink?
Well, I've got an answer on it, but maybe Ken, why don't you
Sure.
sort of address that, since you're EFI and I'm not?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question. I mean, our customers are always looking to drive costs down so they can improve their profitability and run a hyper efficient factory. And we've got wonderful tools. One of the technologies that's been around for over 30 years is called Fiery, and in Fiery we've got some very sophisticated profiling and color management tools, and you have the ability to work with the color gamut to make your ink use more efficient. It is at the expense of some pop and saturation, but I think as we go forward and the analog to digital conversion of all print continues, you see that good enough color being accepted, and that's where you get a little bit more wiggle room. You'll still always have the ability to do very discerning high quality print jobs, and even if you wanted to take it to the pole and use 8-color technology, you can do that. But we see 4-color is very, very successful. The new head technology, particularly in Ricoh Gen 5, is much more efficient than the older generation 12 picoliter technology. So between the head technology, the software around Fiery, I think there's a lot of great tools to help drive more efficiency in ink. I don't know, Marco, any thoughts?
I think in simple terms, you're really talking about removing some of the underlayers of the print.
Yeah.
And then what you get to is, as you mentioned, print quality. And my definition of print quality is very simple. It's either sellable or it's not. And anything that's slightly better than sellable isn't going to get you typically a bigger premium. So that's probably what people are doing, is they're using your software technology to remove some of these underlayers, to remove a little bit of the black density in certain prints. And yeah, it looks a little bit more muted perhaps, but I think most people are surprised that, when you compare the prints next to each other, you'll be able to tell, but when you just put the one with the fewer underlayers out, it's still perfectly sellable.
It's a good.
Hey, so I think we're just about out of time. Want to be respectful for everyone. Thanks to the over 60 people that joined the call today. Marco, on behalf of the over 2,000 EFI employees, thank you for your continued partnership and support of not only EFI, but the industry at large, and really appreciate your time today.
Oh, you're welcome, Ken. My pleasure. Thank you, Dan. Thanks,
Yeah,
Ken.
thanks, Marco. And for those on the phone, and those on there, we will continue this series next month, going through inks and coatings. So we're going to go through a whole series on that. So that's July 20th. Mark your calendars. You'll see more information coming out on this series. We will continue to take questions, from you. Please send them in to us, and we'll post those up and get any answers out to them from there. But again, want to thank everybody for their time today. It is right at 3:00, so we do appreciate your time. Let me see if there's one last round for questions. If I see anything that's pertinent. Otherwise, I think we will keep the session. That was it. That's it for questions. So we appreciate everybody's time. We'll go ahead and end the webinar for today. Thanks all for joining, and thanks Marco and Ken for hosting this.
Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you all. Bye.